Good morning. This week, Democrats want to rush through their nearly 3,000-page America Concedes Act, a bill that caves to China and fails to protect American interests. Democrats' pathetic attempt to deceive the American people into thinking they are standing up to China will not work. Make no mistake, this isn't a bill that competes with China. It's a bill that is China first, America last. If House Democrats were serious about holding China accountable and protecting our competitive edge, they would have worked with Republicans to pass a truly bipartisan bill. But Nancy Pelosi has shown us time and time again that House Democrats have no interest in working with Republicans or being tough on China. The Democrats' Concedes Act comes with a $325 billion price tag and does absolutely nothing to sanction the Chinese Communist Party or hold them accountable for their malign actions. At a time when America is dealing with crisis after crisis caused by Democrats' failed far-left agenda, Nancy Pelosi wants to cater to China by lining the CCP's pockets with your American tax dollars. The America Concedes Act fails to address Communist China's threat to our national security and fails to address one of our greatest threats of this generation. I will now turn it over to Republican leader of House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCaul.
Thank you, Elise. Let me say first, the administration came out with their statement of administration policy, and they left the word China out of their anti-China bill. I think that speaks volumes about the lack of content when it comes to countering the malign influence. This is the greatest threat, a generational threat to our national security. And it's not being addressed by this Congress. And the sad thing is that it was. And we were working Republican, Democrat, in a bicameral fashion to get something done on this issue. The Senate passed my Chips for America Act that I introduced in this bill. We got that authorized in the National Defense Authorization Bill. I had a conversation with Secretary of Commerce Raimondo talking about what can we get done working together as Americans. And we agreed on the phone to pass the Chips for America Act, which would bring manufacturing of semiconductor chips back to the United States. It goes in everything from your iPhone to the most advanced weapon systems being compromised right now by the CCP. That was the plan, and 2 days later, Pelosi threw this thing out. Came out of nowhere, and I think the most offensive thing in it to me is it threw out all the good stuff that we put in there to help counter China from a technology competitiveness, from an ability to stop cash flows into China, the Chips for America Act, the supply chain issue, and instead puts a green climate change slush fund of $8 billion, much of which will actually go to China to help them produce their green energy. Where do they produce their green energy? The batteries and the solar panels in the Xinjiang province, where they actually commit genocide. So just so everybody understands this, U.S. taxpayer dollars going into Xinjiang province where China commits genocide and forced slave labor. To me, it's immoral, it's reprehensible, and even though my Chips for America Act is in this bill, I'm a strong no, and our Republicans are a strong no. And I asked the Speaker to come back and let's do something right for America that's pro-America and not pro-China. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Claudia Tenney.
Thank you. Thank you. On May 24th, or May 24th, 2000, the House of Representatives voted to establish a permanent, normal trade relations with China. The dominant post-Cold War thinking, which pervaded the political class at the time, posited that our markets and our economy to China, opening our markets to China, would bring prosperity, material well-being to both nations. Many even said that expanded economic ties with a democratized China would bring China new freedoms to the Chinese people. We know that not to be true. 2 decades later, things aren't so rosy. In the aftermath of these and other agreements, the United States experienced a decline in manufacturing that has been dubbed the China shock. Millions of manufacturing and other well-paying middle-class jobs disappeared from regions, especially in upstate New York, where the Industrial Revolution was started, and also where I happen to have a business, a manufacturing business founded 76 years ago. We've witnessed the negative impacts on our communities during this pandemic. America's continued reliance on China for PPE and other critical materials is a national security risk. Our ports are also backlogged with goods that we can no longer produce at home. America clearly requires a national political course correction in our relationship with the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. We must take action to restore our nation's manufacturing jobs, small business ecosystem, and technological leadership. Our constituents sent us all here to fix these issues and put the needs of the American people first. However, the House Democrats under Nancy Pelosi are once again using an urgent national need as leverage to cynically push forth unrelated liberal priorities and poison pills in this bill. You don't take my word for it. Look at the White House statement, as my colleague and leader, Mr. McCall said, praising the misnamed America Competes Act, and it didn't mention the word China in it once in their statement. It's pretty, and China being our greatest adversary. The language in the legislation itself talks about coral reefs, climate change, even more than China. This is all you need to know about the priorities in this bill. And even worse, the provisions in this bill will make us even more reliant on China, as my colleagues have indicated. It keeps our supply chains overseas and forces us to depend on China for critical rare earth minerals required to produce chips, solar panels, batteries. We have these resources here. The production should be here in America. We should be utilizing our American workforce and our industrial capabilities here in America. However, the Republican conference has not stood idly by with this disastrous bill. Many of our members, including myself, have submitted strong amendments to boost American manufacturing that would prevent U.S. investment in malign Chinese state-controlled companies, that will hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable, that will counter the full range of threats the Chinese Communist Party poses to our national security. The American people sent us here to Washington to work for them, not for China. The American Concedes Act would only empower in China and threaten America's security interests. And now I recommend, we'll hear from Representative Young Kim.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Congresswoman Young Kim, and I represent California's 39th Congressional District. The Chinese Communist Party's goal is to become the world's top economic power by 2025 and has made it very clear that their goal is to surpass the United States in technology and science. And the reality is they are winning. They are outspending us on research and development. And today, China awards more bachelor's degrees in science and engineering than the United States, EU, and Japan combined. They are producing more STEM graduates than us. And by 2025, they will graduate twice as many STEM PhDs as we do. They are acquiring our valuable intellectual property, sometimes through theft and forced acquisitions. As much as 85% of America's long-term economic growth is due to advances in science and technology, we cannot afford to fall behind. As 2025 looms closer, and as their propaganda is broadcasted to the world starting this week during the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, our nation must be united and unwavering in asserting our global leadership and holding the CCP accountable. Instead of working together to expand STEM opportunities and take concrete steps to hold the CCP accountable, Speaker Pelosi released a bill less than a week ago that was written behind the closed doors and is nearly 3,000 pages and mentions, as you heard over and over, coral reefs more than the word China as our supposed fix to promote U.S. competitiveness. This is neither the way to govern nor address global threats. And this bill does not help us to compete. It concedes our global race to our adversaries. The way to ensure future U.S. leadership and counter China and other adversaries is by working together, not by ramming massive partisan bills through Congress. I tell you, the world is watching us. Xi Jinping is watching us. and we should be sending a clear message of unity. Instead, Speaker Pelosi's partisan Conceits Act plays right into the hands of the adversaries. Thank you. And I yield back to our whip, Steve Scalise.
Thank you. Good morning. It's incredibly disappointing that after months of bipartisan negotiations on legislation to try to confront some of the problems that we're facing from China and to try to bring legislation that would get tough on China, Speaker Pelosi jettisoned much of that negotiation to instead try to bring a backdoor Build Back Better bill to the floor. If you look at this bill, and it's probably appropriately called the America Concedes to China Act, when you look at the provisions and the gifts they give to China, it misses the mark on so many fronts. And Chairman McCall talked about some of the things that we wanted to do. You can look at things like the Chips for America Act, but then you look at so many of the other things we wanted to do to get tough on China that Speaker Pelosi backed away from. And what did she replace it with? $54 billion in new mandatory spending at a time when inflation is through the roof. Families are pleading with Washington to stop the spending, to get control over inflation that is tied to Washington spending. Speaker Pelosi's answer is to double down and try to add $54 billion in new automatic mandatory spending. They create slush funds all throughout this bill that we're whipping against, including an $8 billion fund that has been used to give taxpayer money to China. Imagine this. I've not gotten a single call from a constituent asking to give more money, their hard-earned money, to China. Yet China's gotten $100 million already from this slush fund, and Speaker Pelosi wants to add another $8 billion of American taxpayer money to a slush fund that's given over $100 million of our hard-earned tax dollars to China? This is lunacy. There's so many other things in this bill that are going to make things worse. But look at what they're doing. The same party that has embraced the defund the police movement, that will not stand up against district attorneys in America who won't prosecute criminals here when we've got a crime wave, they're creating, they call it like a global warming police force. I think they call them climate change officers all around the globe, paid for by taxpayers here in America to send climate change officers all around the globe. We need more police here in America, not people going around the globe shutting down manufacturing and giving gifts to China. So this is such a misguided bill. No surprise that there's not a single mention of China in President Biden's statement of administrative policy. But it shows you where their focus is at a time when we should be bringing bills to the floor this week, last week, next week, to focus on the challenges Americans are facing, which is inflation, high gas prices, an out-of-control border, crime that's out of control in most American cities. You look at foreign policy debacles from Afghanistan to the weaknesses that have now led us to where we are with Russia and Ukraine. That's where the focus should be, and unfortunately it's not. It's why, as we work to get the majority back, we will be confronting these challenges. And we're going to continue to lay out alternatives that would actually get our country back on track, face the challenges that we have today that the Democrats won't deal with, including the COVID mismanagement. You look at right now school kids that are, if they're even able to go into the classroom, mandates. We've been asking for guidance from CDC to look at some of the studies that are out there that show the harm that's being done to kids, keeping them out of school, putting mandates in place on kids when the leaders that are putting the mandates in place don't even wear the masks that they're forcing the kids to make. And I think it's those double standards that are infuriating parents all across the country who want and deserve control over their kids' education. So those are the things that we're going to be confronting. And in the meantime, February 18th is right around the corner. Isn't it interesting that government funding expires on February 18th, and you haven't seen this leadership, the White House, the Senate Democrat majority, the House Democrat majority, bringing any bills to the floor to address what is a deadline that we all know has been out there for months. Are they going to wait till the midnight hour again and then declare some new crisis on February 18th that there's going to be some government shutdown when instead they could be dealing with it today? There's no bills on the floor today that are under a rule. They could be trying to bring bills today to stave it off instead of waiting till the midnight hour. But this is what they do. They've shown no ability to manage the government of the United States. And that's why we're going to be pushing for a change and showing the American people better alternatives. With that, we'll be happy to take some questions. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Do you see China as just passively benefiting from a divide that already exists in our country, or do you see them as actively working to deepen that divide and exploit it through disinformation or other means?
Oh, China's more than happy to encourage this divide. And again, when they see weakness in the president, a president that will not confront China on any front. We've been calling for over a year to have hearings on the origins of COVID. And what do they put in this bill? They put a provision in this bill that says it's racist to call it the Wuhan virus or the China virus. There is more and more growing evidence in the scientific community that the COVID-19 started in the Wuhan lab. In fact, there were emails uncovered just a few weeks ago where there were conversations with Dr. Fauci's top advisors, a number of whom were suggesting that it was not a genome structure that could have been originated from a bat to an animal to a human, but in fact was probably genetically modified. And then there's emails between Fauci and Collins that say, hey, let's talk about this on the phone. They shut down the email conversations, which we uncovered. But then on that call, who knows what was said? We should have a hearing on it. But days later, some of those same scientists who were suggesting that COVID-19 started in the lab and was genetically modified reversed course and said it would be a conspiracy theory to suggest that it started in the lab. Shouldn't we know the answers about that? We've asked, by the way, for hearings to find out what really happened on that phone call between the top advisors over at NIH and CDC. We haven't gotten a response. I think the American people want to know an answer to those questions. When you look at the deaths all across the globe, you look still in America, some of these governors and mayors want to shut down their communities. People are ready to get back to their lives. We should have these answers, and we still don't. So we're going to keep pressing for these answers. And if we're in the majority, we will have hearings to get to the bottom of these serious questions. Yeah.
Now the Supreme Court has not dived into the proxy voting question. Have you heard from any members of your conference interested in keeping proxy voting should you all take the majority of that?
We're going to get Congress working in person again. I know Leader McCarthy has talked about this. We will end proxy voting, but we'll also get committees meeting in person again. You know, you look all across America, most people are getting back to work in person. They recognize that, you know, people that want to take precautions can take whatever precautions they want, but we've got to open things up again. And it hurts the legislative process when we're not meeting in person. When you don't have a committee meeting where, you know, if you're on a Zoom screen and you've got one person over here on this screen and somebody else on that side of the screen, you don't get the amendment process working like you used to. You used to have a good, robust, bipartisan committee process where you could actually resolve some of those disagreements in committee because you could walk down the aisle on the dais and talk to somebody from the other party to work through a challenge. Committees do that all the time, and maybe people forgot because they haven't seen it happen in 2 years. We have to get back to that, and we will get back to that when we take the majority. Yes.
I have two questions. The first one's for you. You said that Speaker Pelosi stripped some tough on China provisions. If you could be more specific about those. And then the second one is for Representative McCall. You mentioned Xinjiang. I was wondering, there are sanctions to prevent the forced labor in Xinjiang. Why does that not go far enough?
Well, let me ask, because Chairman McCall's chairman of the China Task Force has been doing incredible work on laying out policies to be tough on China, but he's also been actively involved in the negotiations that were going on for months before Speaker Pelosi jettisoned and tried to go to a backdoor Build Back Better. So I'll ask Chairman McCall if he wants to address those points.
You know, they, I think that's what so violates the moral issue so much is that they put this money into a province that's committing genocide, even though we passed the Forced Labor Protection Act. so these products, the batteries and solar panels, are made with Uyghur Muslim population that are under forced labor. So that's the most offensive, immoral provision in this bill that I cannot accept, even though the Chips for America Act is in here. Again, I was given assurances by the administration that would pass on its own on the floor. That would be the cleanest way to get some movement in Congress in the right direction to bring manufacturing of these really critical national security items back to the United States. And instead, we get this. And very disappointing in the process. I have talked to Senator Cornyn. I know he's talked to McConnell. I think they envision a conference committee so we can take some of this really bad stuff out. I thought the Senate passed a very bipartisan, very countering China bill that also invests in our research and development. As Young Kim talked about, we got to compete with China's technology, AI, quantum computing, 5G. None of that's really in this bill. And so I think those are some of the bigger provisions. And also to think that they're putting funding into the Confucius Institutes in the United States, that when I've talked to the FBI are a direct threat to our national security at our universities. I have personally shut down universities across the country with just sending a letter that this is infiltrating, taking place, espionage on the part of the CCP in the United States. It's the enemy within that is infiltrating our universities, but also 1,000 Talents program at our universities. And that's why we shut down the Houston consulate, because they infiltrated and stole our medical research, including the vaccine and including NASA data. So this is real stuff, and I've talked to DOJ about this. Interestingly, in the prior administration, we had 130 indictments after the Houston consulate was raided. We've only had 8 indictments under this administration. So where's the toughness on China? And that's within in our own country. There's a lot of work to be done. In addition, why are our companies exporting the technology that they use to build the hypersonic? This missile that goes around the world with precision, carrying a nuclear payload with precision that we can't stop. And yet it's our technology that's being used as a backbone to build missiles like that. That behavior needs to stop. We get the majority back. We're gonna use that Export Control Act to stop American technology from going to China that benefits their military, and then they turn their sights right at us. That needs to stop, and it will stop when we get the majority.
Wait, so just to clarify, the sanctions part of it, so you're not confident that those sanctions on the Xinjiang region will be enforced? Or, because there is
I think they're creating a collision course between funding that will go to the very province where they commit genocide. That's where they create the green energy. And so if they're going to give, they've already given $100 million. Now we have $8 billion more. And if the money's going to go to produce those items, the Chinese are going to use that money, and they're going to get around those provisions, maybe moving it to other places, but still using Uyghur Muslim population for forced labor, and they'll get around those provisions. And the idea that we're using taxpayer dollars to do that, I don't know how any of these Democrats can go back home and justify that vote. We had that amendment, my amendment at committee, to prohibit taxpayer dollars from being used for that purpose. That's being used for genocide. And every Democrat voted against my amendment. I don't know how you defend that back home.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do one. Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry. Yes, back.
What is your understanding of how many schools, K-12 schools across the country are closed because of COVID right now? I know there were a lot of closures with the Omicron surge, and now that's abating, and it seems like the situation is
Yeah, it's hard getting exact numbers each week, but a few weeks ago, we saw over 5,000 schools, not systems total, but total schools were closed. And so we've been pushing to get every school open, because the science, there are a lot of really important studies that scientists have said, look, kids are much safer and better off in school. And, so from the health side, they're better off in school. But from the learning side, the data is coming in from the last year and a half, and it's devastating for kids that were not in the classroom. And so we know the damage that's been already caused to millions of kids that were kept out of school last year. The science is very clear that they're safer health-wise and learning-wise being in the classroom. And just a few weeks ago, there were more than 5,000 schools closed. You know, with the number, it fluctuates, of course, every week. But we've been urging every school to be open. We've called on President Biden. You know, he's put billions of dollars out there to school systems, $2 billion which went to Chicago, and they kept some of their schools closed. And we've told them they should pull the money back and say, if you don't open, you don't get the money. It's a common sense idea. Frankly, the money should follow the students. So parents who have kids trapped in schools that are closed because they don't have options should be able to let the money follow the student and go to a school that's willing to teach their kid in person. That's what we're pushing for. That's not where we are right now. Thanks.
Quickly on Ukraine, I know you guys have brief tomorrow.
Yep.